Right now, you are looking at a screen. And if you were like most adults in the developed world, you have been looking at screens for an average of 11 hours today. Your phone in the morning before you got out of bed, your computer at work, your phone again at lunch, your laptop in the evening, your phone one more time before you fell asleep. 11 hours of your eyes locked onto light-emitting surfaces held at a fixed distance, in artificial light, blinking at roughly a third of their normal rate, while the muscles responsible for focusing on that fixed distance hold under sustained tension without rest. What is happening to your eyes during those 11 hours is not simply tiredness. It is not something that resolves entirely with a good night of sleep. According to researchers at the Brian Holden Vision Institute, the Schepens Eye Research Institute at Harvard Medical School, and the World Health Organization's Global Myopia Task Force, the visual demands of modern screen life are driving one of the fastest developing epidemics in ophthalmological history. A global explosion in myopia, dry eye disease, and structural changes to the eye that were essentially non-existent in agricultural populations, and are now affecting over half the population in some urban environments. Your doctor has probably told you to take breaks from screens. What your doctor has probably not told you is the specific biological mechanism through which sustained screen exposure is physically reshaping your eye. What is happening to the tear film on your cornea every time you forget to blink? What the blue light from your screen is doing to your retinal cells, and what the research says about whether these changes are reversible. Today we are going through all of it, because the screen in front of you right now is doing something specific to your eyes, and you deserve to know exactly what. Before we get into specific effects, you need to understand the optical mechanics of what your eye is doing when it looks at a screen, because the mechanism explains the damage. Your eye focuses on objects at different distances by changing the shape of the lens, a process called accommodation. The ciliary muscle, a ring of smooth muscle surrounding the lens, contracts to increase the lens's curvature for near focus, and relaxes to flatten the lens for distance focus. When you look at a screen held at arm's length or closer, the ciliary muscle is in a state of sustained contraction, holding the lens at the curvature required for near focus without release. In normal visual ecology, the visual environment for which human eyes evolved over millions of years, the eye spent the majority of its waking hours focused at distances beyond 6 meters, with periodic near focus for tasks like food preparation or tool use. The ciliary muscle was mostly relaxed. Near focus was intermittent and brief. The modern screen environment reverses this entirely. The ciliary muscle is held in sustained near-focus contraction for hours at a time, with only brief interruptions for distance focus. This sustained contraction is the biomechanical origin of the phenomenon most people call eye strain, the aching, heavy, difficult-to-focus feeling that develops after hours of screen use. The muscle is fatigued in exactly the way a clenched fist becomes painful after sustained contraction. But the consequences of sustained near focus extend far beyond temporary muscle fatigue. They extend into the structural development of the eye itself. Myopia, nearsightedness, is not simply a refractive error that some people are born with and some are not. It is a condition in which the eyeball grows too long from front to back, causing the focal point of light entering the eye to land in front of the retina rather than on it, producing blurred distance vision. And the research of the last 2 decades has established something that ophthalmologists did not fully understand until recently. The axial length of the eyeball is regulated by visual experience during development. The eye is not simply growing to a genetically predetermined size. It is growing in response to the visual signals it receives. The specific signal that drives excessive axial elongation, that drives myopia, is sustained near focus without adequate exposure to outdoor light. A 2012 study published in Ophthalmology, analyzing data from over 4,000 children in Sydney, found that time spent outdoors was the strongest protective factor against myopia development, independent of near-work exposure. Children who spent more than 2 hours per day outdoors had dramatically lower rates of myopia than those spending less time outdoors, even when their hours of near work were identical. The protective mechanism is not the distance of outdoor vision, as was initially assumed. It is the light intensity. Outdoor light, typically 10,000 to 100,000 lux, triggers retinal release of dopamine in the retinal cells, and retinal dopamine inhibits the axial elongation that produces myopia. Indoor screen environments, even with bright artificial lighting, typically provide 200 to 500 lux, 1/20th to 100th of the outdoor light intensity required to trigger adequate retinal dopamine release. Screen time is not directly causing myopia by its near-focus demands alone. It is causing myopia by displacing outdoor time, replacing hours of high-intensity light exposure with hours of low-intensity indoor exposure, removing the dopaminergic brake on axial elongation. The scale of this epidemic is genuinely alarming. A 2016 review in Ophthalmology projected that by 2050, approximately 5 billion people, half the global population, will be myopic, up from an estimated 1.4 billion in 2000. In some East Asian urban environments, myopia rates among young adults already exceed 80 to 90%. This is not a genetic shift. Genes do not change this fast. This is an environmental epidemic driven by the visual ecology of the modern built environment. Dry eye disease is the second major consequence of sustained screen use, and it operates through a mechanism that most people have experienced without knowing what was causing it. The surface of your eye is covered by a tear film, a three-layer structure of mucin, aqueous fluid, and lipids that maintains optical clarity, lubricates the movement of the eyelid, delivers oxygen and nutrients to the corneal surface, and provides the first line of immune defense against pathogen entry. The tear film is replenished by blinking. A normal blink rate is approximately 15 to 20 blinks per minute. Each blink spreads fresh tear film across the cornea and removes the evaporated, debris-laden film that preceded it. During screen use, blink rate drops to approximately 5 to 7 blinks per minute, a reduction of 60 to 70%. The mechanism is attentional. The high visual demand of screen content suppresses the blink reflex through the same mechanism that suppresses blinking during any task requiring focused visual attention. The evolutionary logic is sound. Blinking causes a momentary visual interruption, and sustained visual attention requires minimizing interruptions. But the consequence is that the tear film, which begins to evaporate within 10 seconds of the last blink, is left unreplaced for increasingly long intervals. The corneal surface begins to dry. The optical quality of vision deteriorates. The inflammatory cascade of dry eye disease, driven by the hyperosmolarity of the desiccating tear film activating corneal nociceptors and inflammatory cytokine release, begins. A 2018 study in the British Journal of Ophthalmology found that office workers spending more than 4 hours per day on screens had a 3.3-fold higher prevalence of dry eye disease compared to those spending less than 2 hours per day. The disease is not merely uncomfortable. Chronic dry eye disease is associated with corneal scarring in severe cases, with impaired contrast sensitivity and visual acuity that persists beyond the symptomatic periods, and with a significant quality of life burden documented in multiple patient-reported outcome studies. The environmental factors of screen use compound the blink rate problem. Screens are typically positioned slightly above eye level or at eye level, causing the eye to open wider than during downward gaze, exposing more corneal surface to evaporation. Air conditioning in office environments, which removes humidity from the air, accelerates tear film evaporation. Prolonged concentration on screen tasks delays the voluntary blink that would otherwise interrupt drying. Every one of these factors pushes the corneal surface further toward the desiccation threshold that triggers inflammation. Blue light is the dimension of screen exposure generating the most public attention and the most scientific controversy. The research, once understood properly, is more nuanced than either the alarm or the dismissal suggests. Blue wavelength light, 400 to 490 nanometers, is the primary input to the suprachiasmatic nucleus's circadian calibration system. Evening screen use suppresses melatonin release at exactly the time when melatonin should be rising. A 2015 study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that reading from a light-emitting screen for 4 hours before bedtime suppressed melatonin onset by an average of 90 minutes and reduced melatonin peak levels by more than 50% compared to reading from a printed book. The retinal phototoxicity question is less settled but emerging. High-intensity blue light generates reactive oxygen species in photoreceptors and retinal pigment epithelium cells that cause oxidative damage. A 2018 study from the University of Toledo, published in Scientific Reports, identified a mechanism by which blue light causes photoreceptor degeneration through cytotoxic forms of retinal, the visual pigment molecule, at lower intensities than previously assumed. The implications are preliminary, but prompted the American Academy of Ophthalmology to acknowledge ongoing research into long-term, low-level blue light retinal effects. The 20-20-20 rule, every 20 minutes, look at something 20 feet away for 20 seconds, addresses both accommodative fatigue and reduced blink rate. A 2021 study in ophthalmic and physiological optics found it reduced digital eye strain symptoms by approximately 35% in office workers over 4 weeks. It does not address myopia development, which requires outdoor time rather than indoor distance viewing. A 2020 Cochrane review found artificial tear preparations significantly reduced dry eye symptoms and improved objective tear film measures in screen workers, with preservative-free formulations showing superior long-term tolerability. The most impactful intervention for myopia prevention remains outdoor time at adequate light intensity. A 2017 meta-analysis in ophthalmology found each additional hour per day outdoors was associated with a 2% reduction in myopia prevalence, modest per hour but substantial across the cumulative outdoor hours of childhood development. For adults, outdoor time may slow progression and provides the systemic benefits discussed in our morning routine video. Here is what I want you to carry out of this video. Your eyes did not evolve for 11 hours of sustained near focus on light-emitting surfaces in low-intensity artificial light. They evolved for a visual ecology dominated by distance vision, high-intensity outdoor light, and intermittent near focus. The gap between what your eyes evolved for and what modern life demands from them is producing structural changes, elongating eyeballs, degrading tear films, disrupted circadian rhythms, and potentially cumulative retinal oxidative stress that are measurable, that are accelerating, and that in many cases are not fully reversible. The interventions are not complicated. 20-20-20 for accommodative fatigue, conscious blinking during screen use for tear film preservation, outdoor time every day, not for exercise, not for fresh air, but for the 10,000 lux of light intensity that your retinas need to maintain the dopaminergic brake on axial elongation. Evening screen reduction for circadian protection. These are not wellness suggestions. They are evidence-based responses to a documented biological mismatch between your visual system and the environment it now spends most of its time in. Look away from this screen right now. Find something across the room, or better, through a window. Hold your gaze there for 20 seconds. Let the ciliary muscle release. Let the blink reflex return to its natural rate. Feel the difference. That is what your eyes have been waiting for all day. How many hours have you spent on screens today? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe to the channel because next week we are going into another sensory system that modern life is systematically disrupting in ways the research has only recently begun to document. And I will see you in the next video.